Welcome back to the True Crime Collection, where Jen and Brian are diving into the world's most chilling crimes. From unsolved mysteries to dark endeavors, they uncover the stories that will keep you hooked. This is the True Crime Collection.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading down south, Baton Rouge, in the early 2000s, and you've brought us a case. Well, it's about so much more than just catching a killer, you know.
Right, it's about a city. It's almost like it's wrestling with its own identity, while this terrifying mystery is unfolding.
A city known for its charm, its history.
The scent of magnolias in the air.
Exactly.
And yet under the surface, there's this creeping sense of unease. You can feel it in the air.
Our sources paint this really vivid picture of Baton Rouge at the time, like a city on the brink.
Yeah, grappling with rapid growth and everything, but also trying to hold on to its roots. It's that southern.
It's that tension.
Yes.
That uncertainty simmering beneath the surface.
Absolutely. And that tension, sadly, becomes the backdrop for these crimes. And it scarred the city. The murders, they began quietly, almost insidiously. And the victims, they seem to have nothing in common.
We have Pam Keenamore. She's a successful businesswoman.
Right.
And then Trinisha Column, a young student. It's like two different worlds.
Totally.
And yet both of them attacked while they were alone.
Alone. See, that's what makes this case so unsettling. Even now, it's just the lack of a clear pattern. It's that fear that anyone could be a target.
Yeah.
It makes you start to question everything, everyone.
It's like the killer was a ghost.
Yes.
Just melting back into the shadows after each attack. And then Gina Green. Her story, as our sources detail it, it's heartbreaking.
It is, and it's terrifying.
Just terrifying.
Gina, she was someone you could picture, having a conversation with over the garden fence.
Right.
Kind, caring nurse, loved her family, her routine, her garden. It's like a part of Baton Rouge's innocence died with her.
The sources really went into detail about the crime scene, the killer entering through a window, the struggle in her bedroom. It's terrifying. What struck you about the specifics of Gina's murder in particular?
The chilling aspect, the detail that really gets to me, it's the killer's meticulousness. The way he entered the house, the fact that he took the murder weapon with him, it wasn't just about violence. It was controlled. It was deliberate. Like a disturbing level of awareness.
I can only imagine the terror that gripped the city after that. I mean, to realize that this wasn't just some random act, but the work of someone who planned, who chose his victims, who moved among them undetected.
Baton Rouge became a city holding its breath. The suspicion, the distrust, that constant fear, it's palpable in these articles, this feeling of being watched.
And just when you think it can't get any worse, the killer strikes again.
He does.
Charlotte Murray Pace.
And the brutality of her murder is just deeply unsettling. And what's so fascinating from a psychological perspective, is that stark contrast between Gina's and Charlotte's murders. One so calculated, and the other just seems fueled by rage. You have to wonder, was this a sign of the killer becoming bolder, more impulsive, or was he deliberately trying to mislead investigators? This is something that really haunted the early investigation.
Two very different MOs, a city on edge. A killer who's playing mind games. The pressure on the police must have been immense. What can you tell us about those early stages of the investigation?
The investigation into the Baton Rouge murders, it was like trying to navigate a maze in the dark. Dead ends, red herrings, promising leads that just fizzled out. It was a long and frustrating process.
A couple of names that pop up in the source material. Derrick Todd Lee and Sean Gillis. Why did those two men attract the attention of investigators?
Both men had histories that just raised red flags. You know what I mean? Lee, for example, he had this disturbing pattern of voyeurism, peering into windows, lurking around women's homes. It's the kind of behavior that it sends chills down your spine. This unsettling suggestion of what? Crossing a line?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And Gillis?
Gillis. The sources mentioned this intense, almost obsession with, true crime.
Okay.
He would engage in these graphic conversations about serial killers, delving into the details of their crimes, and while not a crime in itself, this kind of morbid interest, especially considering everything that's going on,
right,
understandably raised some eyebrows.
So we have a city on edge, a desperate search for answers, and two individuals who, on the surface at least, seem to fit the profile. What happens next?
With every passing day, the pressure on investigators, it just mounted, you can imagine. The families of the victims, they're desperate for answers. The media scrutiny was relentless, and the public. They were losing faith. It was then that they decided to turn to this new, somewhat unproven tool, DNA technology.
DNA analysis was still a relatively new tool back then, right? What kind of challenges did they have even processing those samples?
It was a massive undertaking. I mean, back then, the technology wasn't as advanced. It wasn't as fast as it is today. Processing these samples took time. It took resources. You needed a significant amount of expertise. It was a long shot. Really, it was the last-ditch effort to find something, anything, that could connect the dots.
And what did the DNA reveal?
The results? When they finally came back, they sent shockwaves through the investigation. Remember those names we discussed? Lee and Gillis?
I do.
The DNA matched Derrick Todd Lee.
The guy they'd already questioned.
The one and only.
The one with the history of voyeurism. This can't be good.
No, it wasn't. The realization that they had been so close to catching him, that he had been right there under their noses the entire time, it sent a chill through Baton Rouge that had nothing to do with the weather.
I bet. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
And it wasn't just, the police. Just imagine for a second being a resident of Baton Rouge then. This seemingly ordinary guy, someone you might have, passed at the grocery store, hired to do some work around the house.
Right.
Turns out to be the monster who's been terrorizing your community.
It's a chilling thought, that idea that evil can be disguised as normalcy. The sources really emphasize how Lee's arrest just shattered, like this sense of security, this belief that we really know the people around us.
It makes you question everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It forces people to confront that really uncomfortable reality. Monsters, they don't always announce themselves. They're not all sinister grins and hooded cloaks.
Right.
They can be our neighbors, the people we see every day, even, in Lee's case, fathers.
That duality, that hidden side of him, that must have been a key part of how he was able to operate for so long. Did the sources, did they delve into Lee's psychological profile at all?
They touch upon it, yeah. They paint a picture of a man driven by this need for power, control, the meticulous planning, the stalking, the way the violence escalated. It all points to a deeply, deeply disturbed individual, someone who derived pleasure, real pleasure, from inflicting pain, fear.
And to think that the authorities had questioned him, had him in their sights, and still he was able to slip away, continue his spree. Did the sources talk about the fallout from that, the public reaction?
The outrage was palpable. There was this collective sense of betrayal, that feeling that the system, it had failed them. People were angry, they were scared, and they were demanding answers. The investigation, which was already under intense scrutiny, faced even harsher criticism.
Well, yeah. Understandably. To learn that the monster that you've been hunting was practically given a get-out-of-jail-free card, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It was a blow to public trust and law enforcement, for sure. But, it also highlights this really crucial aspect of these kinds of investigations. The importance of not just gathering the evidence, but connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Trusting your gut. And never, ever dismissing those seemingly insignificant details.
Because sometimes, like we saw with Lee's voyeurism, those seemingly small things,
Yes.
those can be the missing pieces of a much, much larger, much darker puzzle.
Absolutely. In many ways, Lee's capture, it was as much a result of scientific advancement as it was a wake-up call. You can't rely on technology alone.
It's about human intuition, experience.
That sixth sense.
That's its
that something's just not right.
Yes.
Lee is apprehended. The weight of the evidence against him, it's overwhelming. What happens next?
Well, for the victims' families, his arrest, I'm sure, brought a wave of relief, but also that just crushing realization that their loved ones were gone forever. Did the sources mention how the families coped with the news, with the trial?
It speaks of unimaginable grief, the pain of having to relive those horrific events during the trial. But there's also this sense of resilience, of finding strength in each other, of honoring the memories of their loved ones by fighting for justice.
It's hard to fathom the strength it must take to face someone like Lee in court, to have to relive those terrifying moments.
It's a testament to the human spirit, the ability to persevere, even in the face of just unimaginable darkness. But the trial, it wasn't just about the families. It was about a community that was seeking closure, a city that had been holding its breath for far too long.
And did they find it? Did the trial provide that sense of closure?
To some extent, I think so. Lee was found guilty. He was sentenced to death for his crimes. And I think that verdict, it brought a sense of relief, of justice being served. But it couldn't erase the pain, the fear, the scars that he left on Baton Rouge.
I imagine the the atmosphere in the city probably shifted once again after the verdict, like a sense of, I don't know, maybe moving forward, but with the weight of everything that had happened still, still present.
Yeah. You're right. The sense of relief, it was palpable. But it was bittersweet.
Yeah.
Baton Rouge had been through this collective trauma, and the healing process with any deep wound was only just beginning.
And what about the city itself? I mean, how does a community recover from something as horrific as this, as the reign of a serial killer?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, there's no easy answer. But the sources, they offer these glimpses into Baton Rouge's long journey toward healing.
Such as?
Well, for one, there's this renewed appreciation for community, for looking out for one another, for speaking up when something doesn't feel right.
Like the city developed a kind of collective sixth sense.
Exactly. And then there are the memorials, those quiet acts of remembrance. They serve as this constant reminder of the lives lost and the importance of vigilance. But perhaps the most profound change, and this is something that we see emerge from these kinds of tragedies, is this deeper understanding of the human capacity for both darkness and light.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Baton Rouge serial killer case, it exposed this dark underbelly of human nature, that capacity for evil that exists within some individuals. But it also revealed this extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, that unwavering love of the families for the loved ones that they had lost, and this just unbreakable bond of a community absolutely determined to heal, to rebuild.
It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of, unimaginable evil, there's always light to be found.
And often, that light shines brightest in the hearts of those who have known the deepest darkness.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, if a bit unsettling at times. It's made me think about my own sense of security, the importance of, staying vigilant, but also about the power of community and resilience. We'll be sure to include additional resources in the show notes if you'd like to, learn more about the case, the victims, or the ongoing efforts to support their families.
It's a story that stays with you.
It does. We'll be back after a quick message from our sponsors. We're back. In this case, I have to say, it really gets under your skin, It makes you question everything, like everything you thought you knew about safety, about the people around you.
It's that reminder
Yeah.
that the world, it can be a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Even those places that feel familiar.
Right.
Our own backyards.
Yeah.
The Baton Rouge serial killer case, it forced people to confront that uncomfortable reality.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that aftermath. What did the sources say about the lasting impact of this on Baton Rouge?
Well, practically speaking, they made significant changes to law enforcement, how they do things. I mean, the investigation, for all its flaws, it really highlighted DNA technology and its role in solving these crimes.
Okay.
It really spurred advancements in DNA databases and how they analyze, all that. And not just in Louisiana, but across the country.
So this tragic case, in a way, it helped propel, forensic science forward.
Yeah, it was a turning point. It really underscored the need for better communication between law enforcement agencies, for more comprehensive databases, and for, honestly, just a greater understanding of the psychology of these kinds of predators, like Derrick Todd Lee.
Like the city or the whole system even had to learn a really difficult lesson.
Yeah, they had to adapt. But it goes beyond, police procedures and forensic science. The sources also describe a real shift in the city's psyche.
In what way? Did people become, more fearful, more suspicious of each other?
There's an element of that, especially right after. It was palpable, this fear. People were looking over their shoulders, double-checking their locks, questioning everything around them in a way they never had before.
I can't imagine living under that kind of shadow, that constant unease.
It was a difficult time for a lot of people. What's interesting is that this fear, this kind of heightened awareness, it led to something else too.
Okay.
This strengthening of community bonds.
How so?
People started looking out for each other more. They formed neighborhood watch groups. They took self-defense classes, sharing information, supporting each other in ways they didn't before. It was like this city, in its vulnerability, found a new strength.
That's actually really inspiring. They refuse to let this fear define them, to let this tear their community apart.
They came together. And that resilience, that's really the legacy of this case, the Baton Rouge serial killer case. Yes, there's sadness, there's anger, there are scars that probably will never fully heal, but there's also this really profound sense of hope, this testament to the human spirit.
It makes you realize that even in the darkest times, Even when faced with something truly evil, there's always light to be found.
And often, that light shines brightest from those who've been through the darkness.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Really insightful, but I'll be honest, a bit unsettling at times too.
It stays with you.
It does. It makes you think about, your own sense of security, the importance of vigilance, but also that power of community and resilience. We'll be sure to include some additional resources in our show notes today if you want to learn more about the case, about the victims, or even the ongoing efforts to support their families.
It's a story that deserves more attention.
It does. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep diving deeper.